significant source of income is if we go with the example of Travis Scott in 2023, he reportedly sold £900,000 worth of merchandise over 2 days from his sold-out show at the O2. You know, and this highlights the important relationship between acts, live performance and brand and image. And globally, if we look at future projections for music merchandise, it's estimated it's going to be worth 16.3 billion worldwide by 2030.
Robin, are they making as much from the merchandise as they are from the sales of music and tickets to shows or not?
Don't
know.
I would say they're making more money through tickets and merchandise than they are from...
Through music, I get it.
Yeah,
okay,
definitely.
I understand. Lauren, let's talk about what they're selling then. These Britpop bands, how important were they to fashion in the 1990s?
I think that they were probably more important to people who were interested in music at the time. So I don't think somebody who was sort of fashionista in the 90s was wearing these kind of clothes. But I suppose it was maybe one of the first eras where those two came together in a way that they hadn't done before.
What do you mean?
I just mean that music and fashion came
see.
together in a way that hadn't sort of so like clearly sort of fused. Like if you think about the Patrick Hensett and Liam Gallagher on the cover of Vanity Fair, that kind of thing. That was the sort of like moment that was kind of really connected to Britpop.
Describe the look that they made popular.
Oasis specifically?
Well, just all of them, all of those. I know those Britpop bands. It is a particular look, isn't it? That in itself looked back to the mods in the 1960s.
Yes, some of it did, for sure. I mean, I would say that Blur, particularly, were doing that. I think that there were sort of like different kind of tribes within the Britpop like umbrella. So there was kind of that influence with Blur. Oasis were very influenced by the kind of football terrace look. And that's where all their kind of retro sportswear came from. And then you have bands like Pulp, who were much more the kind of charity shop chic. So it was a kind of mixture.
We're talking about a revival, but I mean, has that look ever really gone away? The Parker and the polo shows?
I mean, they are classics, aren't they? I mean, they were classics then. I think that's why it's so accessible, because it's something that we all see all the time, especially in the UK.
The little hat.
The bucket hat.
Yeah, I mean, but that wasn't a standard, was it? I think that is something probably that they made their own.
Yeah, I mean, the bucket hat has interesting kind of history. It kind of it's also been popular in the States, and it means a completely different thing there. It was very associated with hip hop in the States, and then Oasis kind of made it part of their look, and because Oasis was such a kind of they're the kind of touchstone of British of sort of Britpop style, that bucket hat has become so associated with that look.
Robin Kay, if you can buy the originals on Depop, why would you want to pay £40 for a bucket hat if you bought in one of these pop-up shows?
It's all to do with cultural resonance, and it's not, what Oasis are doing is it's not innovative, it's just been repackaged, reimagined and scaled. You know, bricks and mortar ice retail stores have existed for some time. You have the Rolling Stones with the No. 9 Carnaby Street location. And, you know, if you go to the 70s, the sex shop and Acme Attractions on Kings Road with their associated short pub, why it's like I say, it's reimagining the whole look and it's broadening it out to a new audience. So with the pop-up store that Oasis have got, they're basically just broadening their retail point to the fans that aren't going to the actual event. And another thing is, a lot of the medium to large size venues, they charge on average 25% of the sales that the artists are selling their merch through. So I've got a sneaky feeling what Oasis are doing are they're circumnavigating that, so they don't have to pay this 25%, as well as opening up their offering to a broader audience.
Can I ask humour before we leave it long. What do you think the next revival will be? I feel like these endless revivals. We don't go back very far though, do we? You know, you say 1920s revival, I don't know. I suppose well, the New Romantics, they went back to the Victorians, didn't they? With all the frilly shirts and everything. How far back might we go? Give us a prediction.
I mean, there is such a thing as called medieval core. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I look forward to seeing it on a high street though. Medieval core, it's like an old hose and pointy little shoes.
Well, I invite you to put it into TikTok.
I will. I'm so looking forward to that. Thank you. You've enriched my life. Lauren Cooke from The Guardian and Robin Kay from Birmingham City University. Thank you very much. Recently on You and Yours, we've been covering a warning. Hundreds of thousands of households could be left without functioning hot water or heating systems, and it was because their old-fashioned electricity meters were going to stop working today. These meters, radio teleswitch service or RTS meters, use the long-wave radio signal, and they use it to switch between peak and off-peak rates for electricity. Now that service is reaching the end of its life, and the switch-off date is named as today, the 30th of June. Energy companies have been rushing to replace all of the RTS meters still in use with new smart meters, but as we've been reporting, it was becoming increasingly clear we weren't going to get to everyone. As of last month, there were still 314,000 households with one of these old-fashioned RTS meters. So now the government has stepped in, and the meters are going to be phased out rather than switched off or threatened. So what does all this mean for households with these RTS meters? People who've been warned their heating and hot water could stop working today. Well, we'll ask the energy companies in a minute, but first, You and Yours listener Richard Montgomery got in touch. He's worried about the implications of the holiday bill he rents out in the Irish sky.
So there are essentially three things that are installed. There's a standard rate electricity meter, looks like an old-fashioned electricity meter. There's a second, known as a white meter, which serves the night storage heating, sort of the off-peak heating. That charges up the radiators overnight and releases the heat during the day when it's required, which also serves the hot water tank. So we are pretty reliant on that working. Then separately, there is this RTS device which is installed beside those two meters, and that controls when the white meter or the off-peak meter comes on.
Have you ever tried to get a smart meter installed?
We tried in 2022 when our electricity supplier said, you have an outdated system, it could fail, so we recommend that you change to a smart meter. I lost patience with all of that because they were just taking so long to get it done, and then I was at no stage given the impression that it was essential to have it done. It was just preferable because they would be able to take meter readings more easily. So it wasn't until the end of last year that I realised there was some urgency to get the meter changed because of the RTS switch off. And the house is rented out. I'm particularly concerned, obviously, that people who've booked their holiday are going to get heating and hot water. It seems like a basic necessity, really. It's just been impossible to get an engineer to come and change the meter. They don't have any availability. It's not possible to book anything. And they keep on saying, don't be concerned, but then they won't give me any guarantees. Until last week, they weren't giving me any guarantees that I would find myself at the end of this month with no supply. Finally, having contacted the local MP and NSP, they got back to me, and the power company got back to me and said, actually, we're going to phase this in. You won't be part of the first phase of the switch off. But why they didn't come up with this sooner, I really have no idea, because I've wasted a lot of time, and they must have as well, fielding constant calls and emails, getting more and more irate. What's it been like this whole process for you? It's been pretty stressful because holiday gets booked in, and I've had absolutely no certainty that they're going to have electricity. As the date has approached, I've got more and more uncertainties until last week when they came up this email which had details of the phased approach, so I cannot fathom why they didn't communicate that before now.
And where does that leave you then? Can you still go to try to get smart?
Yes, so we still have to get it changed, but I'm sure that it will be some time over the next 2 or 3 months. I'm not confident that they're going to do it in the time scale, but have no choice.
That's Richard Montgomery speaking to Tom Mosley. Juliette Sanders is from Energy UK, the trade body for energy companies. Juliette Sanders, isn't this a bit humiliating for the energy companies? You know, all this time warning customers like Richard about this deadline, 30th of June, and now the government's have to step in because you're nowhere near hitting the deadline.
We've been working with the government on this phase-out approach. So from the 30th of June, the phase-out approach will begin. So the signal will begin to be turned off from the 30th of June. That's a really important point to say. There's not just been a deadline or an extension or a deadline extension or anything like that.
Sorry, that's totally not what we understood, not what the energy companies' customers understood. Because when we last had one of the colleagues on the program, they were telling us it was going to be very challenging to reach everyone in time, but that they were ramping things up. There was no suggestion then that it would be a phased switch.
And that's what we've agreed now with the government and with Ofgem, this phased approach. What that means is that then we can take groups of meters at a time and ensure that we're well resourced in the areas to handle any disruption. But really the best way to avoid disruption is to put the meter replacement.
Well, the chance of being fine thing, as we just heard from Richard Montgomery, would be great if it was that simple. I think I can go back to the first question. This is a bit of a humiliation for you, isn't it? You've set this deadline, warned everyone about it, failed to meet it, and the government is stepping in.
The deadline still remains because we're starting the phase out now. I think at the beginning of this project there weren't technical solutions for every home. So the customers previously been told, that a replacement isn't possible, then now there should be a solution for their home. Obviously it's much more difficult in remote areas, but that doesn't mean those customers shouldn't be served. We'll be ramping up in the areas when the signal gets switched off in those particular areas as well.
Can you tell us then who is going to get switched off first? Because you obviously know that since Richard Montgomery has been told he won't be in the first phase.
We're not actually releasing dates publicly because as part of the plan, there are strict checks and balances that we'll be working with Ofgem to make sure that their activity goes ahead until all those balances are happy. And so for that reason it's necessary that the plan takes responsibility. But what we will do is communicate directly with each customer prior to the switch off being in for their meter, and we'll also be notifying MPs and MSPs as well of the activities in there.
Do you accept that the messaging on this with your customers has been absolutely hopeless? You heard what Richard said just now. You're saying now you're going to work with MPs and MSPs. He contacted them because he was getting no answers from his energy company.
I can see that it's been really, really frustrating for customers, especially those where there haven't been technical solutions. But as I said, we have now got those in place. We really, really need customers to book their appointment. I appreciate Richard said that he had difficulties, but really, it's, suppliers aren't able just to go into a home and just replace the meter. They need the customer's permission in order to do so. So it's really important to get that engagement as well.
So you've already had to extend this deadline once before. It was meant to be March 2024, and then it was meant to be the 30th of July. How long do you think before you get around to it? Or will you just never get around to it?
So the 30th of June does remain the start of a new phase. So we are starting to switch off the signal in certain areas. It may be that we never actually reach all customers because, as I said, it does depend on the customer engaging. So at some point we'll have to take a balanced decision that looks at the number of customers left to replace the meter, but also taking into account the fact that this equipment is really outdated. That's why we're doing this. This equipment is 40 years old and it could fail. So it's really important that we balance the speed of getting this done, but also while minimising disruption for customers, and that's why we're taking this phased approach.
The government has said that your progress with this has been unacceptably slow. What do you say to that?
As I said, it's not always within the suppliers. The LTS phase up has been going on for a number of years now, but it does require that sort of sense of urgency, as you noticed from the deadline, and it also also does require customer permission as well to be able to replace that meter. So we're going as fast as we can. Since that phase-out timing is determined and those technical barriers have been overcome, that we really try to replace as many as we can as soon as possible.
What's really going on here? Do you just not have the capacity to communicate with people? Do you just not have the people to send out? Do you just not have the new meters to fit? And I'm just trying to understand what's going on here.
So at some point, the signal will need to be turned off, because it's not possible to continue it forever because the infrastructure is, 40 years old. And so the deadline was set in order to really ramp up the motivation and customer engagement. And as I said, it has worked. We've seen a real ramp up in replacement. And we've also
So to scare people?
No, not to scare people, because the signal will be switched off. So it's really important that people understand that. The deadline indicated the start of the signal being switched off.
Can you guarantee that people will be able to stay on the same tariff they're on now?
When their meter is replaced, if they replace the smart meter,
voices during their performance on Saturday afternoon. The BBC decided to add an on-screen warning to the live stream about the language being used. The Prime Minister led the condemnation of what he called falling hate speech, even as Somerset Police are looking at the footage. And now the BBC says it should have done more, following what it says were deeply offensive comments. In a statement it says it should have pulled the live stream and regrets that this did not take place. Broadcast regulator Ofcom says it's very concerned and the BBC has questions to answer about its editorial procedures.
Israel has carried out waves of airstrikes and artillery fire in Gaza that have reportedly triggered the mass displacement of hundreds of families. Palestinian medical officials say at least 40 people have been killed. The bombardment follows one of the largest evacuation orders issued since the war resumed in March. Mira Davis has been following events from Jerusalem as Israel doesn't allow international journalists into Gaza.
Just like the first night of war all over again, is how one witness described last night's airstrikes in northern Gaza. Relentless bombing shook the ground. The sky rained fire without end, he said in an online message. Dozens of families have been sheltered at Al-Fala school in Gaza City, and an urgent IDF warning told them to evacuate. When the missiles struck, whatever their target, the families had left, but hundreds have again been made homeless. In other parts of Gaza City, even areas towards which Israel had told people to evacuate, the airstrikes killed people young and old. 5 people were brought to the Al-Shafi refugee camp to the west of the city. 10 were killed when an aid warehouse in the east was hit. Benjamin Netanyahu is still basking in the success of Israel's short war with Iran, saying an immediate threat to Israel's existence has been removed. But his plans for Gaza aren't clear. The Prime Minister comes under pressure from hostage families at home and allies abroad to sue for peace and end the war.
Government ministers are trying to persuade rebel Labour MPs to support a watered-down package of welfare cuts ahead of a crucial vote tomorrow. Dozens of backbenchers are still expected to reject the proposals in Commons. The Work and Pension Secretary, Liz Kendall, will outline the key changes later. More from our chief political correspondent, Henry Zuckman.
Having changed its welfare package substantially, the next question for the government: will it win tomorrow's vote in the House of Commons? The answer is most likely. The fact that there's still a bit of doubt reflects quite how much ill will there is across the parliamentary Labour Party. This afternoon, the government has published a new model suggesting that around 150,000 people will be pushed into poverty by 2030 as a result of the welfare cuts, though this is lower than the 250,000 figure before the government scaled back its proposals. Under the compromise deal, changes to eligibility for the personal independence payment will only apply to new claimants rather than those who currently receive benefits, while a new provision to right to try and drop out of stimulus benefits is being considered.
The COVID inquiry has started examining the impact of the pandemic on elderly and disabled people in care homes as well as those receiving domiciliary care. Bereaved families have described the way fathers struggle through care homes as one of the clearest and most devastating failures during the pandemic. Our correspondent Graham Satchell reports on the hearing in Singapore.
The inquiry began this morning with a powerful 20-minute film featuring people with disabilities, care home staff and bereaved family members. Holding back tears, one woman explained how she was unable to hold her dad's hand as he died, and she carried the guilt to this day. The inquiry was told the decision to discharge elderly patients from disability care homes when there was no testing available had had a significant effect. Kate Weatherby, barrister representing bereaved families, quoted the civil servant after help, who said the policy had led to generational exploiting in care homes as the virus spread. This part of the inquiry will sit for 5 weeks.
The 32-year-old woman considered of allowing a young girl who was under 10 to another small Spanish village on Bamford and whether Sophie Reed Gamble pleaded guilty to culpable and reckless conduct. She was 40 and being shepherded on social media sentencing those confronted with his murder. Weather forecasters say it could be up to June days with regular approximately 8 temperatures within degrees Celsius in London. The UK Health Security Agency has added that Northumberland, Wiltshire and the West Midlands for an amber alert warning, already in force across central and southern areas. But rain is expected in Scotland and Northern Ireland, where the maximum temperature will be 23 degrees. And it's the hottest start to Wimbledon record, with a provisional temperature of 29.7 degrees being recorded at the nearby Kew Gardens. Thousands of people are in the queue, some of whom have camped for days in the hope of seeing the world's best tennis players. This is the first year where there will be no line judges, with electronic line being used.
Vijay, thanks very much. The government is desperately trying to win over MPs to its revised welfare reforms before tomorrow's vote on the principle of the policy. But the Department for Work and Pensions released a statement this morning showing that even after the concessions made to quell the revolt, the changes will push another 150,000 working-age adults into relative poverty. Now that figure doesn't take into account any benefit from a greater spend on back-to-work schemes. Before the concessions made over the past few days, 250,000 people will be pushed into relative poverty, a figure that actually includes 50,000 children too. Well, Harry Farley has been trying to gauge whether the changes made are enough to win the rebels.
Motoring as a staircase, MPs come up as they arrive in Westminster. Many travel from across the UK on a Monday, so let's try and grab one or two as they get here for what could be an enormously consequential week for the Prime Minister's authority and this Labour government's ability to govern its own party. Dan Thomason, I'll just stop you. You're passing through the main atrium here in Portcullis House in Westminster. Is it frustrating for you as someone who's generally loyal to the government to having had to defend a position last week, now having to defend a different one this week? I do think we've got to a good place now. We've got to a position where we're going to be seeing in a few hours from Stephen Timms, the Minister in charge of this area, what the direction of travel will be in terms of him working with disabled people's groups to get the PIP reforms right. And I'm happy to bump into you in Portcullis House and to defend the fact that this government is one where the government is working with the parliamentarians to try and find the best way forward. Reforming welfare is really hard. It's really difficult to do. It's really difficult to get right. And it's good that the government is listening to the expertise in the House of Commons to make sure that we can make that happen. How undermining has the last week been for the government and Keir Starmer's own authority?
When I was younger, I had a sign on my wall and it said, "This too shall pass." I should probably get it back up again because it's a saying of old, and it's an important thing to remember in SW1 when you and I are rushing around the place that yes, there are difficult moments. I'm not going to pretend that the last week hasn't been difficult, but you've got to step back. You've got to look at the big picture. We've got a big majority. We've got a Prime Minister, a Chancellor and a Deputy Prime Minister with support from across the vast majority of the Labour Party and definitely within the Parliamentary Labour Party. And we've got 4 years till the next election. We've got to make progress on the big issues that people care about, be that fixing our public services and getting the waiting list down, making it easier for people to see a GP.
Paula Hamilton, you have literally just got off your train from Birmingham. You were one of the main people who signed that original rebel amendment on welfare last week. Tell me what your thoughts are now after the government's made their concessions.
Can I say my first thoughts are, at last the government is listening to us. I am not someone that normally goes against the government or goes into a rebel group, but I felt this was so important because of the importance to our local residents that I needed to make my voice heard. Let me be honest with you. Regarding the bill, I am leaning towards voting for it. Reason being, I have got over 11,000 people in my constituency who are on PIP. They will not lose their PIP, and for me that was really, really important. Secondly, the fact that the government has now conceded and said it will work with disability organisations to help change the way the bill is shaped also gives me hope that they are now listening to what the organisations are saying.
A few minutes ago I spoke to Daniel Francis, another Labour MP, on the phone before he hopped on his train to Westminster. He signed that original rebel amendment last week and he's just sent me a voice note on WhatsApp. explaining what he thinks now.
A number of my concerns have now been allayed following last week. I've always accepted that the current size of the welfare budget and the way it's increasing, that the government does need to address that, and we also absolutely need to address the fact that there are many disabled people that